Today's fractured Supreme Court decision has thrown the political and legal landscape of the United States into a moment of rare uncertainty, delivering a ruling that both strengthens and restricts President Donald Trump's executive authority in ways that analysts say will reshape the balance of power for years to come. The court's opinion, split across multiple concurring and dissenting views, reflects deep ideological divisions and leaves the country navigating a decision that offers no clear winner, only a complex and carefully worded judgment that reinforces some presidential powers while simultaneously placing fresh limitations on others. This mixed outcome has generated an immediate wave of interpretations, each driven by different political expectations, legal theories, and concerns about the future of constitutional authority in Washington. According to today's ruling, key aspects of the presidency, especially those connected to foreign relations, emergency actions, and the internal operations of the executive branch, were upheld as part of the core constitutional structure. In those areas, the court reaffirmed that the president holds broad discretion, especially when acting in matters that involve national security or direct executive responsibilities. Yet in the same decision, the court sharply restricted the president's ability to bypass certain oversight mechanisms and to act unilaterally in areas traditionally shared with Congress. This dual message has created an unusual split in reaction. The White House can claim partial victory, but critics can also point to newly imposed boundaries that limit what Trump can do without legislative cooperation or judicial review. The most striking aspect of the ruling is the court's refusal to offer a simple, unified definition of presidential power. Instead, the majority opinion outlines a conditional framework, one that depends heavily on the nature of the action, the context in which it is taken, and the degree to which existing laws already occupy the field. This contextual approach has already begun to generate debate among constitutional scholars, who warn that the decision may lead to years of litigation as future cases attempt to define the boundaries the court left intentionally ambiguous. Some justices argued in concurring opinions that flexibility is necessary because modern governance demands adaptability, while dissenting voices criticized the ruling as dangerously unclear, leaving future presidents uncertain about the limits of their authority. Inside Washington, early reactions reflect a mix of relief, frustration, and political maneuvering. Administration officials were quick to emphasize that the court reaffirmed substantial elements of presidential power, particularly in foreign policy and executive oversight. These are areas Trump has relied upon heavily while navigating international challenges, negotiating security agreements, and responding to crises that require rapid action. Yet the White House is also aware that the new limits imposed by the court complicate its long-term strategy, especially in areas where Trump has sought greater autonomy from congressional constraints and administrative oversight. Senior advisors acknowledge privately that the ruling may force the administration to adjust its approach on several key initiatives. For lawmakers on Capitol Hill, the ruling has provided ammunition on both sides. Supporters of the administration are framing the court's decision as a validation of the president's constitutional authority, especially in areas where previous administrations have also exercised broad discretion. Meanwhile, critics of the administration argue that the ruling proves the need for renewed congressional involvement in shaping executive conduct, insisting that the court's limits demonstrate the dangers of unchecked presidential power. This interpretive divide guarantees that the ruling will become a central feature in upcoming legislative debates, budget discussions, national security hearings, and political messaging campaigns. Beyond the immediate political repercussions, today's mixed decision reflects a deeper constitutional tension that has intensified across the last decade. The struggle to define the proper scope of executive power in an era marked by rapid crises, polarized politics, and shifting geopolitical realities. The Supreme Court's choice to issue a complex, layered ruling instead of a sweeping declaration suggests a recognition that simplistic answers no longer fit the demands of modern governance. But it also means the country is left with a decision whose consequences will unfold slowly, piece by piece, as federal agencies, lower courts, and political leaders attempt to interpret its meaning. As the decision circulates through legal institutions, federal agencies are beginning their own internal reviews to determine how the ruling affects policy implementation and executive authority across departments. These reviews will take time, but they underscore just how significant today's outcome is. A ruling that neither fully empowers nor fully restrains the presidency, instead creating a delicate balance that could shift depending on how political actors choose to test its boundaries. In a system built on checks and balances, This kind of mixed decision may reflect the reality of the moment, but it also ensures that the debate over presidential power is far from over. The aftermath of today's ruling has already begun reshaping conversations across every branch of government, as analysts absorb the implications of a Supreme Court decision that intertwines strengthened presidential authority with carefully constructed restraints. Legal scholars describe the ruling as a constitutional paradox, one that empowers President Trump in certain spheres while simultaneously reinforcing the judiciary's willingness to intervene when executive action conflicts with established legislative frameworks. This rare dual outcome means the boundary lines of presidential power have not been clarified, but blurred into a more conditional form that demands constant interpretation. What emerges is not a fixed map of authority, but a shifting landscape shaped by context, political climate, and judicial discretion. Inside the legal community, experts are parsing the fine print of the opinion, noting how the court's reasoning subtly reshapes the traditional understanding of separation of powers. On one hand, the decision affirms broad executive latitude in areas where the president acts as the nation's representative in diplomacy or national security. These powers were framed as essential, rooted in both historical precedent and constitutional structure. Yet the ruling also asserts that when a president's actions intersect with domestic legal frameworks, especially those involving statutory limits, budgetary authority, or internal oversight mechanisms, the executive must operate within clearer boundaries. This distinction, while theoretically neat, creates a practical challenge. Many modern presidential decisions overlap both domestic and international dimensions, leaving room for disputes over which category controls in any given case. This interpretive tension is now driving urgent internal reviews across federal agencies, where legal teams are scrambling to determine how the ruling affects ongoing initiatives. Departments that rely heavily on executive authority, defense, homeland security, foreign affairs, are attempting to assess which powers have been reaffirmed and which may now carry new legal vulnerabilities. These assessments will shape how policies are executed in the coming months, including foreign operations, emergency declarations, regulatory enforcement, and presidential directives. Senior officials caution that the ruling's impact may be felt unevenly across the government, with some agencies finding new freedom and others confronting heightened scrutiny. In Congress, the ruling amplified existing partisan divides. Lawmakers on both sides immediately seized on different aspects of the court's opinion, each framing the decision to support their own political narratives. Supporters of the administration emphasized the reaffirmation of executive strength, arguing that the ruling validates Trump's approach to national security and reinforces the constitutional authority of the presidency. They point to the sections of the opinion that emphasize historical deference to executive judgment, especially in matters requiring swift action or confidential decision-making. Opponents, however, highlight the court's insistence on statutory limits, describing the ruling as a sign that the judiciary is prepared to restrain presidential overreach. They note the explicit segments of the opinion that limit unilateral action in areas governed by Congress, arguing that these restrictions demonstrate the need for legislative vigilance. These opposing interpretations ensure that today's ruling will shape the next phase of political conflict in Washington, as each side attempts to use the court's decision to justify aggressive legislative or executive strategies. Internationally, the mixed ruling has generated curiosity and unease among foreign governments who monitor U.S. constitutional developments closely. Allies and adversaries alike rely on predicting the scope of American executive power to assess the stability of U.S. commitments, diplomatic signals, and national strategy. A ruling that expands some presidential powers while restricting others introduces ambiguity into how foreign capitals interpret the strength and predictability of the U.S. executive branch. Diplomats in multiple countries have noted that this ambiguity could complicate negotiations, strategic planning, and alliance coordination, especially at a time when global uncertainty is already reshaping geopolitical alignments. Meanwhile, political strategists across the United States are studying how the ruling might influence domestic elections. Supreme Court decisions that touch on presidential power often become flashpoints in campaigns, shaping voter perceptions of authority, accountability, and the balance between branches of government. This mixed ruling presents a unique challenge for political messaging. It is neither a clear victory nor a clear setback for the administration, but a nuanced judgment that forces candidates, commentators, and political figures to interpret and frame its meaning. As narratives take shape in the coming days, the ruling is expected to become a central point of discussion in media coverage, debates, and election strategy rooms. What remains unmistakable is that today's decision deepens the complexity of presidential governance at a time when the United States is navigating multiple overlapping crises. The ruling reinforces that presidential power cannot be understood as a single, rigid force. Instead, it is now defined by a delicate interplay of constitutional text, judicial interpretation, political momentum, and the evolving pressures of national and international events. This mixed decision ensures that questions surrounding executive authority will not settle quietly. They will continue to shape legal disputes, political battles, and national conversations for years to come. The hours following the Supreme Court's mixed ruling have seen an expanding wave of institutional recalibration, as federal courts, legal scholars, and political actors begin the process of interpreting an opinion that raises as many questions as it answers. Across the judicial system, lower court judges are preparing for a surge of litigation as lawyers attempt to test the new boundaries defined today. The decision's layered structure, granting the president broader discretion in some contexts and imposing tighter constraints in others, has created a legal environment where disputes over classification, intention, and statutory overlap will likely dominate future cases. Court officials anticipate a period marked by procedural complexity, where even routine challenges may require deeper constitutional analysis, as both sides attempt to shape how the ruling is applied. Inside major law schools and legal think tanks, scholars are dissecting the opinion sentence by sentence, tracking how the majority, concurring, and dissenting views subtly reposition long-standing doctrines around executive authority. Some experts argue that the ruling reflects the court's effort to modernize the constitutional framework to account for the evolving nature of presidential responsibilities. Others contend that the decision reveals a fractured judiciary, unable to reach consensus on the core meaning of executive power. This intellectual divide is already fueling new debates over constitutional interpretation, with some scholars warning that the court has introduced ambiguity into an area that demands clarity, particularly during periods of global instability and domestic political volatility. Government agencies, still digesting the specifics of the ruling, have begun initiating interdepartmental briefings to map out the potential consequences. These internal discussions focus not only on legal exposure but also on operational continuity, as agencies attempt to determine which presidential directives remain secure under the court's expanded endorsement, and which may now face new legal vulnerabilities. Some departments are preparing for legislative scrutiny, anticipating that Congress may attempt to assert authority in areas where the court signaled the need for stronger statutory foundations. Other agencies are considering whether certain policies, previously pursued under broad executive authority, may now require recalibrated strategies to avoid falling into the newly defined zones of legal contention. Political strategists close to the administration have spent the day assessing the ruling's impact on the president's broader agenda. The mixed nature of the decision provides opportunities and challenges. It offers the White House renewed legal justification for some initiatives, yet it also demands greater caution in areas where the court emphasized statutory limits. Advisors recognize that missteps could quickly escalate into constitutional confrontations, especially if political opponents attempt to frame the ruling as evidence that the administration is operating outside its proper authority. Within this environment, communication strategy becomes critical, as the administration must present the ruling as a reaffirmation of presidential strength while navigating new boundaries with precision. In contrast, critics of the administration are organizing their response around the court's expressed limits on unilateral executive action. These political figures argue that the ruling reinforces the constitutional necessity of checks and balances, insisting that the presidency cannot be permitted to operate without legislative or judicial oversight. They emphasize the sections of the opinion that restrict executive maneuvering in domestic governance, highlighting concerns that the modern presidency has grown too powerful at the expense of democratic accountability. Their narrative positions the ruling as a corrective measure, one that calls for renewed congressional engagement in shaping national policy. This competing framing ensures that the ruling will become a central ideological battleground in the months ahead, influencing political discourse across the country. International observers have also responded to today's developments with a mixture of caution and strategic calculation. Foreign governments closely track the structure of American executive power because it directly influences diplomatic commitments, military posture, and global stability. A ruling that reinforces certain presidential powers while limiting others introduces a level of unpredictability into how foreign leaders evaluate the U.S. political system. For allies, this uncertainty complicates long-term planning, as they must assess whether American commitments remain durable across fluctuating legal interpretations. For competitors, the ruling may present opportunities to exploit perceived moments of domestic instability or policy hesitation. Analysts in several major capitals have noted that today's mixed decision adds a new dimension to ongoing evaluations of U.S. strategic reliability. As these global reactions unfold, the broader public remains caught in a moment of confusion, reflecting the complexity of a ruling that resists simplified narratives. Citizens searching for clarity encounter conflicting interpretations from political figures, legal experts, and media outlets. Some believe the ruling strengthens the presidency. Others view it as a significant restraint. Many are left questioning what the decision truly means for the future of American governance. This uncertainty highlights how deeply the nation relies on clear legal guidance during periods of heightened political tension, and how destabilizing it can be when the highest court delivers a ruling that expands power in one breath and tightens it in the next. What becomes increasingly clear is that today's decision does not conclude the debate over presidential authority, it accelerates it. The coming months will reveal how political leaders, federal agencies, the judiciary, and the broader public choose to interpret the ruling's nuances. In a constitutional system built on shared powers, even a single ambiguous ruling can alter the dynamics of governance, shaping behavior not just in the present, but for years to come. Today's mixed decision has created that kind of moment, a turning point where every actor in the system must now decide how much to test the boundaries the court has drawn, and how much to adapt to a political landscape that has suddenly become more uncertain than before. In the day's final hours, the implications of the Supreme Court's mixed ruling continued to ripple outward, touching every institution and political layer connected to the balance of executive authority. Federal agencies remained immersed in legal briefings, re-evaluating internal policies that rely on presidential directives. Many departments now face the difficult task of determining which parts of their operational authority have been strengthened by the court's reaffirmation of executive discretion, and which may now fall under newly sharpened judicial scrutiny. This internal reassessment underscores the broader reality revealed by today's decision, that presidential power is no longer a static, easily defined concept, but a flexible structure subject to shifting constitutional conditions. Within the White House, aides spent the evening planning how best to frame the ruling as a strategic advantage, emphasizing the sections that affirm presidential strength while downplaying the constraints. Communication specialists understand the importance of shaping the first public narrative, especially in a moment where confusion and political spin can rapidly distort public perception. Their task is complicated by the ruling's dual nature, forcing them to walk a careful line between asserting authority and acknowledging limits. The administration is aware that any misinterpretation or misstep could invite legal challenges or reignite political confrontations that carry the potential to derail key policy objectives. Members of Congress, meanwhile, are preparing for what many describe as the next phase of institutional tension. The ruling's mixed outcome has empowered both critics and supporters of the administration, giving each side new arguments to justify upcoming legislative battles. Committee chairs are already discussing hearings focused on executive accountability, citing the court's cautionary language about unilateral action in domestic affairs. At the same time, lawmakers aligned with the administration are pushing for a renewed assertion of presidential discretion, using the court's reaffirmation of core executive functions as evidence that the presidency must retain the agility necessary for effective governance. This parallel buildup of political agendas foreshadows months of intense debate over the structure and limits of federal power. In the legal world, today's ruling is expected to become the center of a growing body of commentary, litigation, and scholarly dissent. Constitutional experts warn that the decision's layered framework, part restriction, part reinforcement, will produce new tests of its boundaries, as future presidents, agencies, and courts attempt to interpret its scope. Some scholars believe the ruling marks the beginning of a new era of constitutional pragmatism, where the court acknowledges that modern governance cannot be neatly divided into rigid categories. Others argue that the decision risks creating a constitutional gray zone, one in which neither the executive nor the judiciary can confidently predict the limits of authority until those limits are challenged in court. This divide is likely to fuel years of legal debate, shaping how future judges interpret executive power long after today's political moment has passed. Among the American public, the ruling adds to a growing sense of uncertainty about the direction of national governance. Citizens accustomed to clear-cut victories or defeats from the Supreme Court now face a decision that resists simple interpretation. In an era defined by political polarization, many people look to the court for clarity. Instead, they must now navigate a ruling that acknowledges both the necessity and the danger of concentrated executive power. This ambiguity has left many viewers searching for guidance, trying to understand how the decision affects the presidency, the separation of powers, and the broader constitutional structure that underpins American democracy. International reactions also continue to evolve as foreign governments analyze how the ruling might influence U.S. decision-making. Allies who depend on consistent American leadership are examining whether the mixed ruling will create hesitations or internal disagreements within the U.S. government, particularly in areas involving defense commitments, treaty negotiations, or rapid diplomatic response. At the same time, competitors are watching closely for signs of uncertainty they might use to their advantage, interpreting the decision's ambiguity as a moment where political and legal confusion inside the United States could influence geopolitical negotiations. These global assessments reveal how deeply intertwined American constitutional decisions are with international strategy and stability. As the day comes to a close, what stands out is not the clarity of the Supreme Court's ruling, but the complexity it introduces. The decision neither empowers nor restrains the presidency outright. Instead, it redraws the boundaries in ways that will be tested through political conflict, judicial challenge, and administrative adaptation. The ruling forces the country to confront a more intricate understanding of executive power, one defined by context, legal nuance, and the evolving demands of national governance. It marks a moment where every actor in the constitutional system must reassess their role, their influence, and their expectations of the presidency. The consequences of this ruling will unfold slowly, shaped by future decisions, future conflicts, and the willingness of political leaders to navigate a landscape where authority is shared, contested, and constantly in motion.